Have you ever caught yourself acting in a way that eerily mirrors your parents' behavior? Maybe you shut down during conflict, avoid vulnerability, or feel guilty for taking a break. Not because you chose to, but because that's what you grew up seeing. Maybe your father went silent when things got tense, and your mother buried her needs for the sake of stability. And now somehow, you're doing the same. It's easy to dismiss these reactions as personality quirks. But what if there's something deeper? What if they're echoes? Emotional instincts inherited from people who never got to heal. For me, I began to realize the way I responded to pressure and success didn't just reflect my parents. It also reflected what shaped them. Since I was a child, I remember there were expectations for me to meet, goals to reach, and falling short wasn't an option. It didn't strike me as odd. Sometimes, my parents seemed to be operating like robots, crossing off the next task from the checklist, constantly rushing through life with stress as the dominating fuel. The weight of their frustrations, anger, and unspoken disappointments over work, things they couldn't express or relieve, seemed to seep into my own life. They were striving for success, but it came at the cost of their emotional well-being, and they wanted me to achieve what they had not. I was expected to do more, be more, all while dealing with their unspoken expectations, carrying the weight of their frustrations and anger, as well as unmet dreams and disappointments. It felt like an unending cycle. I believed it was just the way things were. My parents were raised the same way, their parents before them. Navigating my life filled with pressure and an immense amount of anxiety. It all led me to wonder, how heavily can we be shaped by negative behaviors or expectations, as well as systemic issues, wars, or worldwide financial crises? Now let me ask you, have you ever heard the term intergenerational trauma? Simply put, intergenerational trauma refers to the psychological and physiological effects of trauma that get passed from one generation to the next. It's not just about individual struggles. It's a systemic issue that quietly shapes societies, families, as well as personal identities. Symptoms of intergenerational trauma manifest in ways we often don't recognize, such as heightened anxiety or stress responses, hypervigilance, patterns of emotional avoidance, and even physical health issues, such as a higher risk of heart problems or stroke. But how does trauma, something that happened to someone before us, affect us so deeply? Intergenerational trauma can manifest in multiple ways: biologically, socially, mentally, and emotionally. The mechanisms by which trauma is transmitted are complex and often subconscious. Let's start with the biological aspect. The scientific research on intergenerational trauma is heavily related to epigenetics, which is the study of how external experiences can modify gene expression without actually altering the underlying DNA sequence. But how does that happen? Think of it like a light switch. Certain experiences can turn the genes on or off, affecting how they function. Trauma, especially if severe or prolonged, can leave these switches in a permanently altered state, affecting not only the individual, but also their descendants. Studies on epigenetics suggest that significant traumatic events can leave chemical marks on a person's genes, affecting how their DNA is expressed. And these changes do not alter in any way the genetic code, but they can shape the way our bodies respond to stress and danger. This can result in heightened susceptibility to stress, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And these epigenetic changes can then be passed down to future generations, affecting their susceptibility to stress, anxiety, or in extreme cases, cause genetic PTSD, which is a condition that is triggered by experiencing or surviving trauma. It can cause symptoms such as flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbness, severe anxiety, along with the inheritance of violent behaviors. Studies conducted on children of survivors of severe abuse and war veterans suggest that these individuals exhibited heightened stress responses, difficulty regulating emotions, and even repeat patterns of both violence and self-destruction. Furthermore, studies conducted on Holocaust survivors and their children found that the descendants of these survivors had higher levels of cortisol dysregulation, which is a key indicator of stress responses. This shows how trauma passed through generations can literally affect the biology of the next generation. Our genetics do a great job of keeping us safe, even if it doesn't necessarily mean keeping us happy. While our genes are primed for stressful or traumatic events, they do respond with greater resilience to those events. But this constant state of anticipating danger is taxing. This is a trade-off. While our bodies are designed to protect us, this constant readiness for danger increases our stress levels, and over time, it can take a toll on both our mental and physical health. These survival responses then get encoded in our genetic material, and as we know, can be passed down to future generations. However, generational trauma is not just a genetic inheritance. It's also deeply embedded in learned behaviors and social conditioning. Families who have experienced trauma, whether it be war, forced displacement, abuse, or systemic oppression, develop coping mechanisms that, while initially protective, become maladaptive over time. These learned behaviors, such as hyperindependence, emotional suppression, or distrust, are then unconsciously taught to the next generations. One of the most prevalent examples is seen in the parenting styles of those who have endured hardship. Parents who grew up in an environment of instability may develop rigid, fear-based parenting methods, passing down an ingrained sense of insecurity to their children. This cycle is evident in various communities that have faced historical oppression over the years, such as indigenous populations, descendants of enslaved people, as well as refugees of war-torn regions. However, it's not only historical atrocities, like genocide or wars, that shape our generations. It's also the everyday struggles, societal expectations, and cultural norms that mold entire populations. The way people are raised under these circumstances shapes their worldviews and emotional patterns, often reinforcing cycles of emotional suppression and resilience at the cost of vulnerability. This shows how those societal norms can be just as influential as large-scale traumatic events, creating generational cycles that are difficult to break. I would especially like to focus on how intergenerational trauma uniquely impacts Generation Y, more commonly referred to as millennials, and Generation Z. Studies suggest that younger generations are experiencing increased amounts of anxiety, depression, and burnout, much of which is influenced by those inherited trauma responses. Millennials, whose parents were impacted by war, economic instability, and political turmoil, have had to adapt to a rapidly shifting capitalistic world. They were raised with the expectation of constant achievement and stability. Yet they entered adulthood in an era of job market volatility, skyrocketing living costs, and economic crashes. As a result, millennials sometimes live in a state of a so-called perpetual stress and urgency, prioritizing their careers over personal fulfillment and often experiencing burnout. Their parents' trauma has shaped them into a generation that equates survival with productivity, sometimes at the cost of their emotional well-being. And because of this, millennials, now parents themselves, often struggle to provide children the emotional presence that they need. Many work long hours, lack work-life balance, and in their exhaustion may pass down an unintentional emotional neglect to their children. Generation Z, who was raised in the world of constant information as well as comparison for social media, is often impacted by these responses. And social media only exacerbates the effect of inherited trauma. Unlike millennials, however, I believe that our generation is far more aware of, as well as concerned about, mental health and trauma-related issues, leading them to actively seek therapy and develop healthier coping mechanisms. So can we break the cycle of intergenerational trauma? The answer is yes, but it does require intentional effort. One of the most powerful tools available is therapy. Trauma-informed therapy helps individuals identify inherited patterns, reframe their learned behaviors, as well as develop healthier coping mechanisms. But breaking the cycle also involves self-awareness. Recognizing our inherited triggers, acknowledging the ways in which they impact our lives, and most importantly, making a conscious effort to rewrite those narratives. Healing is not linear. It requires patience, community support, and sometimes unlearning deeply ingrained beliefs about ourselves and our worth. Healing is not just an individual act. It's a collective responsibility. Families, communities, and societies must foster environments that promote emotional resilience and open conversations about mental health. Generational trauma thrives in silence. But when we talk about it, we begin to reclaim our stories. The cycle may feel endless, but it isn't. With awareness, effort, and the right support, we can break free. Healing is an act of rebellion against the wounds of the past, and every step towards self-awareness is another step towards breaking the chains of inherited pain. The question is, will we choose to be the generation that heals? Thank you.